I'm going to talk about some of CIC's new initiative for cross-border investment activities to lay out the foundation for our discussion for the panel. Understanding that the panel is the only thing between you and the dinner, so I'll be very, very quick. Next page, please. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Yeah. Here I'm just showing a few things. I attended Davos, the economic forum in Davos earlier this year, and what struck me the most was that everybody was talking about China and the U.S.-China trade conflict, and I was invited to give a quick summary on China and the U.S.-China relationship. In the closed-door dinner hosted by Goldman in front of some business leaders. And what I told them was that when I walk around the Davos and I heard a lot of discussions and concerns, all of which boiled down to two things. One, whether China still have a growth potential. Secondly, how would China get along with the rest of the world when its economic size gets this big? This is the data I quote to the audience. I said, well, what happened to China in the past 40 years? It got transformed from a country which could not feed 800 million people to a country where almost half of the 1.4 billion people are trying to lose weight. And back in 1978, China's GDP was only 1% of that of the, of the global GDP. Now China produces 50% of the steel, 60% of the cement, and a quarter of the vehicles in the world. And due to two drivers: one, reform; the other, opening up. And what happened last year at the 40th anniversary of China's reform and opening up, President Xi vowed to the world that China will stay in the course of reform and opening up. Therefore, I think we, as reasonable, we have, we can be reasonably optimistic about China's growth in the future. And when China's economic size gets this big, the only way for China to go forward is to, achieve a win-win with the rest of the world, and that's exactly our strategy for outbound investment. And this chart shows the growth of China's per capita GDP in the first 30 years of opening up, between 1979 to 2009. China's per capita GDP grew 168 times, whereas China's per capita saving grew stunning 1,600 times, which can explain the explosive growth of China's outbound investment, in particular in the FDI, direct investment arena. So you're looking at almost 100 times growth in that sector. And unfortunately, a lot of the investment either failed or caused a lot of anxiety. How come? I think the key element, the key source of failure was information asymmetry. And we have realized that to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of cross-border investment, there is a need to build a platform in which you can convene different parties from different countries, both for institution and for financial and industrial players. And the CIC being the largest sovereign wealth fund in China, it's our responsibility to build that platform, and that's exactly what we're trying to do. We have altogether about $200 billion to deploy, and also we own about 42% of total China's financial asset, making ourselves in the perfect position to do that. At the same time, I think what we try to bring to the table is to take advantage of China's huge consumer market. And this picture just shows the most recent marathon game that took place in Shanghai, which I took part in. And if you can recall, China started the marathon events back in 2011, when the first year China had only 9 events. Getting to 2016, it was 360. It's per marathon, 1 marathon per day. And in some nice spring day, spring weekend, you would have 43 marathon events on one single day. And what that's going to do, that brought to the global industry is that it changed the whole landscape. And this Japanese running shoemaker was about to go bankrupt, but because of China's runners, they got saved. Chinese runners actually saved probably 30, 40 brands, like Nike, like Adidas. And so I think we have room to really bring the 2 largest economy in the world together and benefit both sides. So the one strategy is we came up with a $5 billion fund with Goldman Sachs. Is my friend Mark. Yeah, Mark is in this room, who is our Goldman Sachs coordinator for this fund. So we look at a lot of the Midwest states, and you find out there are a lot of industries in those states which are leading Chinese economy by a comfortable margin. You look at a P&G, Motorola in early days. You're looking at a John Deere, Caterpillar, and Medtronic, all of those companies. And in particular, I would like to mention a company which might be a no-namer. 20 years ago, it was not doing very well in the States, and it's A.O. Smith, situated in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And they went to China about 20 years ago. They grew 22% annually, consecutively in the past 16 years. What does that mean? They grew 25 times. They made it into S&P 500 because of Chinese market. And we would like to duplicate that kind of success in a comprehensive way. So with President Xi and President Trump witnessing our signing ceremony, Goldman Sachs and the CIC signed this deal back in the November of 2017. And unfortunately, we had this trade war last year. And even with that tension and the conflict, we were able to raise $2.7 billion from the international market. And we were able to make the first investment. We were able to engage that business with China. Actually, the sales of that particular company 2 years ago in China was $20 million, last year $40 million, and this year expected to be $80 million, which will account for 10% of the total global sales. But we think that's not enough. We want to make sure that they will grow to be 30% of total global sales as soon as possible. And we have also worked with 5 leading Japanese financial institutions to put together a partnership which will help integrate the Japanese industries with Chinese industries. So the deal was signed last year when Prime Minister Abe visited China. And also at the same time, we're working, we just signed a deal with France. With President Xi and President Macron witnessed the signing ceremony. And our partners in France are BNP Paribas and Eurazeo, a private equity house. And Yeah. Also, we have realized that there's a lot of need to cooperate between China and the rest of the world, except people don't know each other, and there's a lot of information asymmetry, cultural barrier, regulatory hurdle, all of that. How we can overcome that? I think the best way is to build this public platform or open platform. So we started the CIC Forum 2 years ago, in which we were able to gather 1,200 CEOs from China and the rest of the world. Last year, the number came up to 3,300. We were even able to bring 200 Chinese CEOs over to the United States, to Chicago last April, at the height of U.S.-China trade conflict, to speak to equal amount of American CEOs. So last year's event, thanks to Goldman's collaboration, we had about almost 400 CEOs from U.S. and China to come together and talk about a cooperation. And this is and also it made Goldman and the CIC, the two teams, to become truly one team. So this is now we have pretty much formulated our strategy of outbound investment. We're going to do it in a kind of matrix way. We have built and are building 12 bilateral funds: U.S. China, Japan China, France China, UK China, and Switzerland China, Germany China, Nordic nations, Israel, Korea, and Australian. And at the same time, we try to partner with industrial leaders in advanced manufacturing, healthcare, TMT, and consumer. So for any investment, we're going to seek the partnership or help from both our country partner, typically they are national champions, and our industrial partner, typically they are leaders in their own field. And the purpose, if there's any mission for cross-border outbound investment activity for us, CIC, is number one, we try to accelerate the modernization of Chinese economy and the society. Here I'm showing the comparison of industrial evolution in the US for the past century and China in the past 40 years. You can see a lot of similarities, except China is still lagging behind in a lot of industries, so we have a long way to catch up. And the second mission is to have China's growth benefit the rest of the world. We're seeing on this chart that China and the US explain about half of global growth. And China is probably 35%, US 17%. So there is room for China to share with the rest of the world for its prosperity. And lastly, President Xi warned that we should try to avoid this Thucydides trap. I don't know anybody can do it better, and probably better sooner than later. And when we were doing this U.S.-China Industrial Cooperation Fund, I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of investors in the U.S. and around the world. What I showed to them, typically in some presentations, was this chart in which you can find that the flights between U.S. and China was 61 flights every single day. I told the audience that that was not enough. We hope to see 100 or 200 flights between U.S. and China every day. That's only going to make U.S. economy, Chinese economy, better, and would make this world a more peaceful place. And that's going to also benefit our next generations. Finally, I would like to quote Professor Jeffrey Sachs in his recent article, The Shifting Global Landscape, in which he said, the 17th, 18th century or European century, the 20th century was probably American century, and the 21st century might be China century. but he said he would rather see a global century or world century in which we are so much interwoven that we cannot tell the difference from each other. I think with everybody here, making all this effort, I think we're making one more step toward this destination. Thank you.